Morning 5A and 5B. Well, that was a bit of fun with the electricity this morning. Here we are. We're recording now, and I'll post this recording to Google Classroom. Again, my apologies. Just after I had admitted Ahmed and Mehmet, the electricity just stopped. So apologies, Ahmed, you were the first to be admitted to the class. So obviously Zoom reverted to you. All right, well, welcome to my own classroom. So here I am in my classroom in Alexandria. I told you before I was a book fan. Well, here you are. So books on every resource that you might want, on every topic that you might want. However, our topic today is Nelson Mandela. So I have something to show you. I was going to show you this, online. Misty, no. Sorry, my cat, who would like to get in on the lesson too. Okay, so here he is. Nelson Rolihlahla, that I was telling you about, Mandela's life story. And if you remember last time, Rolihlahla is his own real name. Okay, so let's go on. Mandela's early years. Mandela was born on the 18th of July, 1918. In a small rural village. So rural means in the countryside, not in a city, in Eastern Cape of South Africa, named Maveso. So there it is. You can see, here is the map of South Africa, and you can see where he came from. Okay, his birth name was Rolihlahla, which means, as I told you last time, troublemaker, in Xhosa, which is the language of his tribe. His father was chief of the Xhosa speaking Tembu people. So it was expected that he would grow up to be the chief. This is like the king. So as I was telling you, people in some parts of Africa still today live in tribes. This would be large family groups of maybe 10 people and maybe 5 family groups, so 50, 60 people all together. And they would have their own chief, which means king. Okay. Unfortunately, his father died when he was 9 years old, and his uncle became the new chief. Nelson spent a lot of time with his uncle, the new chief, and learnt many great lessons from him about being a good leader. The most important lesson he learnt was to listen to everyone's ideas, to allow everyone to have their own opinion. So it's like in class, when I say to you, what do you think about this? I am asking you to take part in any decision that we make and to listen to those opinions before making a decision. So basically what this means is he wanted to know what everybody thought before he said, okay, I think the best thing to do is A, B, and C. Yes, I've heard D, E, and F, but I think A, B, and C is better. Okay. Rolihlahla went to school at a mission school. So this is a school that is paid for by probably a church. It was here that one of his teachers gave him the name Nelson. He worked hard at school and also enjoyed sport. Okay, so he was a hard worker. When he was 22, he left home and went to live in Johannesburg. Okay, Johannesburg is the capital of South Africa. Living in South Africa under the apartheid government's rule was very difficult for Nelson. and he experienced many hardships during this time. He decided that instead of just complaining about the terrible injustices, okay, so we've got some language here that we need to explore. So, he experienced many hardships, things that were hard for him. He decided that instead of complaining, just moaning and groaning about it, about the terrible injustices, things that weren't right. So things, as we talked about, that Nelson Mandela and people of his colour could not go on the same bus. This is not justice. This is injustice. So the opposite. The best thing he could do was to study to become a lawyer and to join a political party who was fighting against apartheid. So, do you remember in the last lesson we said apartheid actually means separateness? Do you remember when I said about my pen? I separated the top from the bottom. So here are two fingers. I've now separated them. So it means apart. In 1944, he joined the African National Congress, also known as the ANC. Okay, so this was the political party he joined. Nelson was an active member of the ANC, which is African National Congress, fighting against the government. Soon he became a leader in the ANC. The ANC organised mass public campaigns and other protests. They also refused to obey any of the unjust apartheid laws. So there was no violence. Nelson Mandela was not a violent man at all. And he didn't encourage violence. He didn't say to somebody to take part in an act of violence. Quite the opposite. So it was peaceful resistance. Okay? So what I mean by resistance is saying, no, we won't do that, but in a peaceful way. During apartheid, black people were required to carry a passbook, almost like a passport, with them at all times, wherever they went. Nelson refused to carry it, and he burnt his passbook in protest of this rule. It would be like an ID card, just to say that you were a person of colour. White people were not required to carry this book. They did not have to carry a passbook to say they were white. So Nelson Mandela and his colleagues, followers said, well, why should we carry a passbook to say that we are black? Okay. In 1962, the government banned the ANC. So what this means is the government in South Africa said the ANC were not allowed to be an organisation anymore. This meant that no one was allowed to belong to the ANC, and the ANC no longer was allowed to exist. So basically the South African government was saying no more ANC. The members of the ANC decided that if they needed to step up their efforts to get the government to listen to them, some members then began armed attacks and bombing crowded areas. Again, Nelson Mandela and his followers never agreed that this was correct. Okay? But some more, we would say, radical, this means more extreme members of the ANC did start to do this. In response to these attacks, the government arrested 10 leaders of the ANC and tried them for acts of treason and sabotage at Rivonia trials. So some of the ANC leaders were arrested. The trial ended on the 12th of June 1964 with 8 of the accused. So accused means 8 of the people that the government said had done something being convicted. So this means they were found guilty, including Mandela, Sisulu, Mbeki, Motsoaledi, Malagany and Goldberg being sentenced to life imprisonment. Okay, so all of these people were sentenced to life imprisonment, which means they were going to be imprisoned and they weren't going to come out again. Okay, all of the prisoners except for Goldberg, because he was white, so the ANC had white members too, because he was white, were sent to Robben Island prison for hard labour. This means that what they were doing in prison was things like breaking rocks. His prison number, Nelson Mandela's prison number, was 46664. While in prison, the prisoners selected Mandela as their leader, as they respected his honesty and ability to be a fair leader. So his own people elected him. Whenever there was a disagreement amongst the prisoners, Mandela would step in to help sort it out. He used the valuable lessons he had learned back in his village to help him, and always listened to both sides of the argument. So this is what I tell you in class. There are 2 sides to every story. Okay. So here is his prison cell. Mandela's years in prison. Life on Robben Island, and I have been there. I've actually been in this cell. It is now a tourist attraction, Nelson Mandela's cell. Life on Robben Island was not easy for the prisoners. The cells were so small that when Nelson lay down on his sleeping mat, so as you can see, no bed, just a mat on the floor, his feet and hands could touch the opposite walls. So his feet would be here and his hands could touch this wall. He only had a metal bucket as a toilet. Prisoners were not allowed radios or newspapers, and they were only allowed 1 visitor and 1 letter every 6 months. Sounds very harsh, right? Mandela was in prison for nearly 27 years. And during that time, always remained true to his beliefs. Okay? So he never changed his mind despite the hardships in prison. He stayed true to his beliefs that everybody deserved to be respected and treated fairly. He understood that the prison guards were just doing their jobs. And he treated them with respect. Some actually became friends of his. He also used his time in prison to learn to speak Afrikaans, which is the language of the white people. It is a dialect, which means it is like, in language, like Dutch. And to get to know more about the Afrikaner culture and history. So he educated himself in the culture and the history of the white people in South Africa. He also spoke to the prison guards about why he had chosen to fight for democracy and his dream for South Africa. So he actually treated the prison guards very well and very respectfully. And he was telling them about his dreams for South Africa. Okay. So here we are, a very happy slide, free at last. On the 2nd of February 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. He and President F.W. de Klerk, so the white Prime Minister, or white President, started making changes so that all South Africans could live free lives under a democratic government, a government that had been elected by the majority of the people. This is a democracy. On the 27th of April 1994, the first democratic elections were held in South Africa, and everyone over 18 was allowed to vote. Everyone over the age of 18 was allowed to vote. So this is men, women, black, white. As long as you are South African, you are allowed to vote. For many people, this was the first time that they were allowed to vote, as only whites were allowed to vote under the apartheid government that was in power. So, this is the first time the black South Africans, who are the majority, so there are more black South Africans than white, were allowed to vote. The ANC won the elections, and on the 10th of May 1994, Nelson Mandela was sworn in as South Africa's new president. He was the first black president that South Africa had ever had. He chose F.W. de Klerk and Thabo Mbeki to be his deputy presidents. So he said the man that had helped him, the former president, F.W. de Klerk, stayed on to be vice president or deputy president. This was, an amazing thing. Before, it was unthinkable. Nobody could think that a white person would be an assistant to a black person. So this was the first time living as a free man in South Africa. Mandela was a great South African leader. South Africa prospered under his leadership. Okay, so it became wealthier under his leadership. There are a lot of natural resources in South Africa, which is the reason that the Dutch people were very interested in it in the first place. There are diamond mines, there are gold mines in South Africa. People called him Tata, which means father. So they saw him as the father of South Africa. He was admired by many other world leaders as well and went on many state visits. In 1993, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. This award was shared with F.W. de Klerk. So the two men that brought South Africa to a happy conclusion were awarded a prize by the Nobel Institute, and there are lots of Nobel prizes, some for maths, some for arts, but this Peace Prize is the most well known. So there he was, as a more elderly man. Mandela wrote an autobiography about his life called Long Walk to Freedom in 1994. I've read this book. It is amazing. It is a book that teaches us a lot about patience, kindness, perseverance. So trying and trying and trying again. So if you don't get it right the first time, to try again, and understanding. Nelson Mandela finally retired as president in 1999. And from 2004, he gave up politics completely to enjoy a quiet life with his loving wife, Graça, and his family. He died peacefully at home with his family on the 5th of December 2013, and he was 95. So he lived a very long life, despite his hardships, despite the 27 years in Robben Island, the prison. He lived a very long, very happy life. And there he is. This is the new South African flag. encompassing lots of different things. Blue for the waters, for the sea around South Africa. Black, symbolizing the black majority of people. Green for the Transvaal area, which is very green, and it grows a lot. It is very abundant, so a lot grows there. Red for the blood that was spilled. White, symbolizing the white people of South Africa, and you think yellow, but it's actually gold for the prosperity, the gold mines of South Africa. Okay, so when South Africa became a democracy, a new flag was designed, and it was Nelson Mandela's idea that all of these colours should be included. It's kind of a rainbow flag, isn't it? Okay, so from last time we had your worksheet, which I've got here, and I will post both of these to Google Classroom for you. What I would like you to do is read through basically same information, and you've got some questions to answer. All of the answers are in the two texts, this one and the last one that I showed you. What did Nelson's real name mean? It says in both texts what it means. Okay, so what did Nelson Mandela have in common with Gandhi? Which two statements are true? Mandela and Gandhi were both born in India. Were they? No, you know where Nelson Mandela was born? It wasn't India, right? They both went to prison for their beliefs. They did. Mandela and Gandhi acted peacefully to protest about lack of freedom. Yes, they did. Both men are still alive today. No, unfortunately not. What do you think? Explain in your own words what apartheid means. I explained it to you, the word apartheid. So there's space there for you. Most of the paragraphs have a subheading to help you read. Let's check that. So subheadings? Yes. Working for change. Apartheid. Early years. That's your lesson objectives. Okay, fine. So let's go down. So most of the paragraphs have a subheading to help you read. Yep. Think of a different subheading for each of the first 3 paragraphs and write a new one for the final. Okay. In the paragraph called Working for Change, the word peaceful protests were met with violence are written. What do you think this means, and why was there violence? So, peaceful protests. So people maybe standing with signs saying this is not right. Are they acting in a violent way? They're not. But these peaceful protests were met with violence. What do you think that means? And why do you think there was violence? Why? Okay. So the final thing is a bit of fun. So in the timeline below, there is some missing information. Use the extract to help you complete it. So this is Nelson Mandela's timeline. So in 1918, what happened? In 1948, the government passes the law of apartheid. So nothing missing there. So Nelson Mandela goes to prison. There's something missing here. There is a date missing. 1993, he wins the Nobel Peace Prize. Okay, there is something missing here. Nelson Mandela becomes the first black. There's a date missing here. And first black what? 2013, Nelson Mandela died on what date? What date? And down here, you have a photo with children. Sometimes black children didn't get to go to school. So Nelson Mandela was very, very keen on education. He actually said education was life. So he said it is a privilege and a right that sometimes some children do not get. So he's encouraging, and he was very keen on actually saying, appreciate the education that you get. So there he is visiting a school, and here he is receiving his Nobel Peace Prize along with F.W. de Klerk, who became his assistant. One of them, he had two deputy presidents. I keep wanting to say prime minister because we have a prime minister at home. Okay, so I'm going to post this for you to Google Classroom. I will put a date on it. Guys, for most of you, I'm still missing the homework from Silver Turtle Takes Off. I haven't forgotten. I need that homework. And I will post this for you with a date on it. Okay, see you tomorrow.